He was a landowner, a man of modest means who had something a king wanted. And when he refused to sell, the machinery of the state turned against him. This is the story of how a man was murdered for his vineyard. Not by assassins in the night, but by forged documents, false witnesses, and a show trial. All perfectly legal, all utterly corrupt. Today we investigate what may be the most detailed account of judicial murder in ancient literature. A case involving identity theft, witness tampering, perjury, and state-sponsored execution. The year is approximately 850 BC. The location, Jezreel, a fertile valley in the northern kingdom of Israel. The victim, a man named Naboth. The accused, King Ahab and Queen Jezebel. The charge, murder by legislation. To understand what happened to Naboth, we need to understand who Ahab was, and more importantly, who he married. Ahab was the seventh king of the northern kingdom of Israel, son of Omri, founder of a powerful dynasty. By the standards of ancient Near Eastern politics, the Omri dynasty was remarkably successful. Archaeological evidence confirms that Omri and Ahab built impressive fortifications, established trade relationships, and wielded real power in regional affairs. But the text of 1 Kings paints a darker picture. According to the biblical narrative, Ahab did evil in the sight of the Lord above all that were before him. 1 Kings chapter 16, verse 30, and Ahab the son of Omri did evil in the sight of the Lord above all that were before him. What made Ahab worse than his predecessors? The text points directly to his marriage. And it came to pass, as if it had been a light thing for him to walk in the sins of Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, that he took to wife Jezebel, the daughter of Ethbaal king of the Zidonians, and went and served Baal, and worshipped him. Jezebel was a Phoenician princess, daughter of the king of Sidon, a coastal city known for its wealth and its worship of Baal. She was not merely a foreign wife. She was an agent of religious and political transformation. And she came from a culture with a fundamentally different understanding of royal power. Now here's what most people miss about this story. In Phoenician society, the king owned everything. Land, resources, people, all belonged to the crown. The monarch's word was absolute law. If a king wanted something, he simply took it. But Israel operated under a different system. The land of Canaan, according to Israelite law, didn't belong to the king. It didn't even fully belong to the people who farmed it. Leviticus chapter 25 verse 23, "The land shall not be sold forever, for the land is mine. For they are strangers and sojourners with me." Every family's plot of land was considered a divine trust, a nachalah, an inheritance passed down from the original tribal allotment under Joshua. This wasn't merely property. It was identity, connection to ancestors, connection to God himself. The Hebrew word nachalah appears over 200 times in the Old Testament. It means far more than real estate. It means heritage, patrimony, the portion God himself allocated to your family. To sell your nachalah permanently was to sever yourself from the community of Israel. It was, in a sense, to unmake yourself. Remember that word. It becomes the hinge of this entire case. Now we come to the scene of the crime. And it came to pass after these things, that Naboth the Jezreelite had a vineyard, which was in Jezreel, hard by the palace of Ahab king of Samaria. The royal family maintained a residence in Jezreel, in the fertile valley that bears the same name. The soil there is rich, excellent for growing grapes. Right next to the palace walls, a man named Naboth worked his family vineyard. Every day, Ahab looked out his window and saw it, those vines, that land, so close he could almost touch it. One day, Ahab made Naboth an offer. And Ahab spake unto Naboth, saying, "Give me thy vineyard, that I may have it for a garden of herbs, because it is near unto my house, and I will give thee for it a better vineyard than it. Or, if it seem good to thee, I will give thee the worth of it in money." Now here's where the story gets interesting. By worldly standards, this was a fair offer, maybe even generous. Ahab wasn't threatening Naboth. He wasn't pulling rank. He was offering either a better vineyard elsewhere or full market value in silver. Any reasonable businessman would have taken the deal. Naboth's response was immediate and absolute. 1 Kings chapter 21 verse 3. And Naboth said to Ahab, "The Lord forbid it me, that I should give the inheritance of my fathers unto thee." This wasn't stubbornness. It wasn't negotiating tactics. Naboth was invoking the divine law that prohibited permanent sale of ancestral land. He was saying, "This isn't my vineyard to sell. It belongs to my children and their children and their children after them. It belongs, ultimately, to God. And no amount of money could change that." Now watch how Ahab responds. This detail reveals everything about his character. And Ahab came into his house heavy and displeased because of the word which Naboth the Jezreelite had spoken to him. For he had said, "I will not give thee the inheritance of my fathers." And he laid him down upon his bed and turned away his face and would eat no bread. The king of Israel, commander of armies, one of the most powerful men in the ancient Near East, and he goes to his room, lies on his bed, turns his face to the wall, and refuses to eat. Like a child denied a toy. Ahab knew Naboth was right. He knew the law. He understood that he had no legal means to compel the sale. And so he sulked, but his wife came from a different world. But Jezebel his wife came to him, and said unto him, "Why is thy spirit so sad, that thou eatest no bread?" Ahab explained the situation. And Jezebel's response drips with contempt. 1 Kings chapter 21 verse 7. And Jezebel his wife said unto him, "Dost thou now govern the kingdom of Israel?" In other words, what kind of king are you? In my father's house, kings take what they want. They don't ask permission from peasants. Arise and eat bread, and let thine heart be merry. I will give thee the vineyard of Naboth the Jezreelite. That single sentence, "I will give thee the vineyard," set in motion one of the most calculated murders in biblical history. What Jezebel did next was not a crime of passion. It was a meticulously planned operation that weaponized Israel's own legal system against an innocent man. So she wrote letters in Ahab's name and sealed them with his seal, and sent the letters unto the elders and to the nobles that were in his city, dwelling with Naboth. The first crime, forgery. Jezebel drafted official correspondence using the king's name and the king's seal. In the ancient world, a royal seal was the equivalent of a signature, a notarized document, and a government order all in one. The seal made it law. But here's what the text actually says about Ahab's involvement at this stage. Nothing. The text never shows Ahab authorizing this plan. It never shows him handing over his seal. It describes Jezebel acting alone, using his authority without his explicit consent. Does this exonerate Ahab? We'll return to that question. For now, let's examine the contents of those letters. And she wrote in the letters, saying, "Proclaim a fast, and set Naboth on high among the people, and set 2 men, sons of Belial, before him, to bear witness against him, saying, Thou didst blaspheme God and the king. And then carry him out, and stone him, that he may die." This is the scheme, broken down. First, proclaim a religious fast. This creates the appearance of a spiritual crisis, a solemn occasion that demands community attention. Second, seat Naboth in a prominent place. Give him a position of honor. Make him visible. Third, bring in 2 witnesses, and the text is very specific about what kind of witnesses. Sons of Belial. That phrase deserves our attention. The Hebrew word Belial comes from 2 roots meaning without and prophet. A son of Belial is literally a worthless person, but the phrase carries darker connotations. Throughout Scripture, sons of Belial are associated with the most despicable crimes, leading communities into idolatry, committing sexual violence, sowing division. Jezebel needed professional liars, men without conscience, men willing to send an innocent person to death for payment. She found them. Fourth, have these witnesses accused Naboth of a capital crime. And not just any crime, blasphemy against God and the king. Under Israelite law, blasphemy carried the death penalty. and the law required 2 witnesses for a capital conviction. Jezebel wasn't improvising. She knew exactly which legal requirements to satisfy. Finally, execute him by stoning, the prescribed punishment for blasphemy. The entire plan was designed to appear legally legitimate: a public fast, a formal accusation, multiple witnesses, a proper execution method. Everything by the book, except the charge was false, the witnesses were paid, and the outcome was predetermined. Now here's the most disturbing part of this story. And the men of his city, even the elders and the nobles who were the inhabitants in his city, did as Jezebel had sent unto them, and as it was written in the letters which she had sent unto them. 1 Kings chapter 21, verse 11. And the men of his city, even the elders and the nobles, did as Jezebel had sent unto them. The elders complied. The nobles participated. The community leaders of Jezreel received orders to murder one of their own citizens, and they obeyed without question. The text gives no indication of resistance, no protests. No one asking difficult questions about why the king suddenly needed a religious fast, or why Naboth, a man with no prior criminal history, was being accused of blasphemy. They proclaimed the fast. They gave Naboth the seat of honor. They brought in the false witnesses. And there came in 2 men, children of Belial, and sat before him. And the men of Belial witnessed against him, even against Naboth, in the presence of the people, saying, Naboth did blaspheme God and the king. The trial, if we can call it that, was over in moments. Then they carried him forth out of the city and stoned him with stones, that he died. Naboth was dragged outside the city walls and executed. A second text, in 2 Kings chapter 9, verse 26, adds a detail the first account omits. Surely I have seen yesterday the blood of Naboth, and the blood of his sons, plural. The text implies that Naboth's sons were killed alongside their father. Why would Jezebel order this? Because under Israelite law, if a man was executed for a crime, his property passed to his heirs. To seize the vineyard cleanly, the entire family had to be eliminated. This wasn't just murder. It was the extinction of a family line, carried out to steal a piece of land. When it was done, the elders sent word to the palace. Then they sent to Jezebel, saying, Naboth is stoned and is dead. And Jezebel, her hands technically clean of blood, delivered the news to her sulking husband. And it came to pass when Jezebel heard that Naboth was stoned and was dead, that Jezebel said to Ahab, Arise, take possession of the vineyard of Naboth the Jezreelite, which he refused to give thee for money. For Naboth is not alive, but dead. 1 Kings chapter 21, verse 15. Arise, take possession of the vineyard of Naboth the Jezreelite. For Naboth is not alive, but dead. Naboth is not alive, but dead. The phrasing is almost mocking. The obstacle has been removed. The problem has been solved. The vineyard is waiting. And it came to pass when Ahab heard that Naboth was dead, that Ahab rose up to go down to the vineyard of Naboth the Jezreelite, to take possession of it. Notice, Ahab doesn't ask how Naboth died. He doesn't inquire about the circumstances. He doesn't express surprise or concern. He simply rises from his bed, the same bed where he'd been sulking, and walks down to claim his prize. If this were a modern case, we would now examine motive, means, and opportunity. We would trace the chain of evidence back to its source. We would ask, who is ultimately responsible? The means are clear: forged documents, paid witnesses, a complicit judiciary. The opportunity: royal authority exercised through official channels. But the motive, here's where it gets complicated. The immediate motive was a vegetable garden. The text says Ahab wanted the vineyard, that I may have it for a garden of herbs. The Hebrew phrase refers to a cultivated garden, possibly a pleasure garden like those maintained by ancient Near Eastern monarchs. The king looked at generations of carefully tended vines and saw a kitchen garden. But the deeper motive was something else entirely. This case was never really about land. It was about two incompatible visions of power. Naboth represented the older tradition, The idea that even kings answer to divine law, that property rights exist independent of royal will, that the humblest landowner can say no to the most powerful monarch. Jezebel represented absolute rule, the Phoenician model where royal desire is automatically royal right, where subjects exist to serve the crown, where no is not an acceptable answer. When these two worldviews collided over a single vineyard, only one could survive. Now we come to the question of Ahab's guilt. Some readers have tried to soften Ahab's culpability. After all, the text shows Jezebel hatching the plot, writing the letters, orchestrating the execution. Ahab appears passive, first sulking, then simply accepting the outcome. But here's what the text actually says. 1 Kings chapter 21, verse 25. But there was none like unto Ahab, which did sell himself to work wickedness in the sight of the Lord, whom Jezebel his wife stirred up. The text doesn't excuse Ahab, it condemns him. He sold himself to work wickedness. Jezebel stirred him up, but he made the choice to be stirred. He provided the seal. He accepted the stolen property. He asked no questions when a convenient death removed the obstacle to his desires. In legal terms, even if Ahab didn't directly order the murder, he created the conditions for it, he benefited from it, and he took possession of its fruits. That's not innocence. That's conspiracy after the fact, at minimum. But the investigation doesn't end with human authorities. And the word of the Lord came to Elijah the Tishbite, saying, Arise, go down to meet Ahab king of Israel, which is in Samaria. Behold, he is in the vineyard of Naboth, whither he is gone down to possess it. God saw what happened, and he sent his prophet to confront the king at the scene of the crime. Picture this moment. Ahab has just arrived at the vineyard. Perhaps he's walking the rows, imagining where his garden will be. The ground where Naboth's blood was spilled is barely dry. And out of nowhere, Elijah appears. And thou shalt speak unto him, saying, Thus saith the Lord, Hast thou killed, and also taken possession? 1 Kings chapter 21 verse 19. Hast thou killed, and also taken possession? This single question strips away all pretense. God doesn't ask, did Jezebel kill, or did the elders kill? He addresses Ahab directly. Hast thou killed? The king who never touched Naboth, who never testified against him, who never threw a stone, he is held responsible for the murder. In God's courtroom, the one who benefits from injustice shares the guilt of those who commit it. Ahab's response is remarkable. And Ahab said to Elijah, Hast thou found me, O mine enemy? Not I didn't do it. Not Jezebel is responsible. Not what are you talking about? Just, have you found me, my enemy? He knew exactly what he had done and exactly what it meant. Elijah delivered the verdict. And he answered, I have found thee, because thou hast sold thyself to work evil in the sight of the Lord. Behold, I will bring evil upon thee, and will take away thy posterity. The judgment matched the crime. Ahab used his royal authority to exterminate Naboth's family line. God would exterminate Ahab's family line. And of Jezebel also spake the Lord, saying, The dog shall eat Jezebel by the wall of Jezreel. 1 Kings chapter 21, verse 23. The dog shall eat Jezebel by the wall of Jezreel. The dogs that licked Naboth's blood would consume Jezebel's flesh. The very city where the crime was committed would witness the punishment. And this is exactly what happened, not immediately, but inevitably. 1 Kings chapter 22 records Ahab's death in battle, his blood running across his chariot and being licked by dogs at the pool of Samaria. 2 Kings chapter 9 describes Jezebel's end. Thrown from a window, trampled by horses, her body devoured by dogs until nothing remained but her skull, her feet, and the palms of her hands. The stolen vineyard became a monument to divine justice. But there's one more twist in this narrative. When Ahab heard Elijah's pronouncement, something unexpected happened. And it came to pass, when Ahab heard those words, that he rent his clothes, and put sackcloth upon his flesh, and fasted, and lay in sackcloth, and went softly. The king who sulked over a vineyard now mourned over his sin. The man who couldn't be troubled to eat because he couldn't have what he wanted now fasted in repentance. And God responded, "Seest thou how Ahab humbleth himself before me? Because he humbleth himself before me, I will not bring the evil in his days, but in his son's days will I bring the evil upon his house." Ahab's repentance was genuine enough to delay the judgment by a generation. It couldn't undo the crime. It couldn't restore Naboth or his sons. But it demonstrated something important. Even the most corrupt heart can be reached. Whether this makes the story more hopeful or more tragic depends on how you read it. What does the text actually state? A man named Naboth owned a vineyard next to King Ahab's palace. Ahab offered to buy it. Naboth refused on religious grounds. Queen Jezebel forged letters in Ahab's name, ordering the elders of Jezreel to arrange a show trial with false witnesses accusing Naboth of blasphemy. Naboth and his sons were executed by stoning. Ahab took possession of the vineyard. The prophet Elijah pronounced divine judgment on both Ahab and Jezebel, prophesying violent deaths for both prophecies that were later fulfilled. What does the text imply? It implies that systemic corruption involves multiple levels of complicity. Jezebel conceived the plan, but the elders executed it. Ahab may not have ordered the murder, but he created the conditions for it and profited from it. The entire community was complicit in varying degrees. It implies that legal formality means nothing without moral substance. The trial of Naboth satisfied every procedural requirement: public assembly, multiple witnesses, proper punishment. And it was still murder. It implies that God sees through human systems of power. The same king who could command armies and build palaces was brought to account by a single prophet in a stolen vineyard. And what can we take from this today? The story of Naboth is not ancient history. It is a template that repeats wherever power encounters conscience. When legal processes are manipulated to destroy the innocent, when official seals authorize unofficial crimes, when sons of Belial, worthless men willing to bear false witness, can be found for the right price, when entire communities comply with injustice because the orders came from above. Naboth stood alone against the machinery of the state. He had no army, no influence, no recourse. He had only the law of God and the inheritance of his fathers, and he said no. That refusal cost him everything. But it preserved something that Ahab and Jezebel, with all their power, could never destroy: a witness to the truth that there are things more valuable than life itself. 1 Kings chapter 21 verse 3, "The Lord forbid it me, that I should give the inheritance of my fathers unto thee." 3,000 years later, we still remember Naboth's name. We still study his case. We still invoke his vineyard as a symbol of unjust seizure. Ahab built palaces. Jezebel commanded prophets. They had everything the ancient world could offer. And yet it is Naboth, the victim, the martyr, the man who would not sell, whose story endures. The Naboth case remains one of the most detailed accounts of judicial corruption in ancient literature. It documents how legitimate institutions can be weaponized against the innocent, how complicity spreads through systems of power, and how divine justice operates on its own timeline. Ahab died in battle, his blood consumed by dogs. Jezebel was thrown from a window and devoured. The dynasty they built was exterminated within decades. And the vineyard? The text never tells us what happened to it. Perhaps that's the point. What was stolen at such terrible cost turns out, in the end, not to matter. What matters is the question that echoes through the centuries. Hast thou killed and also taken possession? That question is still being asked. In courtrooms, in boardrooms, in legislative chambers, wherever the powerful reach for what belongs to others, wherever legal forms mask moral crimes, wherever the Naboths of this world stand against the Ahabs, that question awaits an answer. If you've made it this far, you're clearly interested in what these ancient texts actually say. Consider subscribing for more investigations into the case files of biblical history. Next episode: The Spy Who Saved a City, Rahab. Next time on Bible Case Files: A City Under Siege. a prostitute making deals in the dark, and a scarlet cord in a window. The story of Rahab's spy, traitor, survivor. A woman who gambled everything on a God she'd never met.